Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this valuable Power Retail webinar session brought to you today by e-commerce platform solution provider eStar. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Pranitha Govender. I'm the editor of Power Retail, and I'll be introducing our guest speaker very shortly. Before the introduction, some quick housekeeping. Mobile phones, if you could please turn them to silent. I can't ridicule you if it goes off because I won't hear it, but that's besides the point. You probably want to pay attention because this is going to be a great session today. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions. You can enter these at any time in the question dialog box on your dashboard, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can. We've got a big session ahead this afternoon, so get comfortable. Today we have Greg Randall, digital strategist at eStar, who will give you an appreciation of how your homepage stacks up to the best practice and provide you with the science behind all homepage elements. By the end of the session, you'll have some actionable insights with a clear view of the changes you need to make to work towards creating an amazing homepage for your online store. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Greg Randall.
Thanks, Pranitha. And look, I want to get started and get going right away because I'm really excited to talk about this with you guys today. But want to get going because we've got a lot to cover off. So first off, you ever wondered what we look like? There we are in our glory. Thank you. And look, I'm not going to spend time talking about myself. There's some content about my history if you're interested. But the one thing I will say very quickly is, in the past 15 years, I've worked with literally hundreds of retailers around the world, changing and shaping and driving retail success for each. And in the last 5 years, I've been writing for eConsultancy, the global leader in publishing best practice content. And I'm also a published author in this field. So that kind of explains why we're having this conversation and this presentation today. Want to talk very quickly about eStar as well. eStar is Australasia's largest specialist e-commerce solution provider. And what does that mean? Essentially, it's an extremely powerful e-commerce technology, but wrapped around it are these incredible value-add services that enables retailers to deliver amazing retail experiences, both digitally and physically. And you can see by the client list, there's some very impressive clients that the eStar organization powers and works alongside. Okay, so first off, I want to talk about what's in it for you. Everybody listening in is taking precious time out of their busy day, and I want to talk about what you're going to get out of this session. Pranitha touched on it, and I want to kind of make this really clear. In working with e-commerce and digital teams around the world, it's very common to see that these teams have a gut feeling that their page layouts are not quite right, but they don't know where to start in terms of facilitating change. And I see two very common behaviors. One direction is they work towards the A/B testing route, but testing page variations on a shaky foundation, and when I mean shaky, I mean not best practice, they produce wrong results. And when I say wrong results, I mean it's not adding value to the experiences. So those of you listening in, if you've conducted A/B testing, you've got a result that won, and you actually apply it permanently, and the conversion rates aren't growing, this is part of the reason as to why. The other thing I see commonly is that these teams of e-commerce and digital teams will copy competitors or large brands, assuming they've got it right. In many instances, they don't. So look, I've written a white paper titled The Best Practice Homepage and How Best Practice Can Heavily Contribute to Creating Amazing Online Experiences. This webinar is literally the highlight reel of this white paper. And look, everybody's gonna get a copy of this white paper after this presentation, so I don't want people to be spending time jotting down notes or trying to memorize everything I'm saying. It's going to be impossible. So sit back and relax. So the first thing I want to talk about is the impacts of best practice and understanding that. And first I want to define it. Best practice is a culmination of research and years of doing that results in the proof of processes or digital ways of working that are deemed most effective. Now, the Harvard Business Review did a lot of work on this, a lot of work in research, and they found that those organizations who exhibited exponential growth are not those who invest heavily in R&D. And this is what everybody seems to think. This is a bit of an excerpt from the research findings from the HBR. The main source of productivity slowdown in underperforming organizations is due to the pace at which best practice spreads throughout their business economy. So they're basically saying best practice is propelling knowledge throughout the organization, or what HBR calls knowledge diffusion. And in the digital context, best practice expedites the digital evolution of an organization. And look, the exciting thing about best practice and why I get excited about it is because I've done a number of digital transformations for large retailers, where in the situation where they are considered to be behind their competitors in terms of their digital presence and their conduct, and through the activities of infusing best practice, not only do they leap ahead, they many times leap forward beyond their competitors. And I've seen it firsthand, which is why I guess you could say I'm quite passionate about the topic. So look, throughout the webinar, I use the term page elements, and I want to define that so we're all clear on why I'm using this term. Page elements are the micro components of a page working together to drive consumer engagement. So you see the picture in front of you. That's an example of a header, and the retailer logo is a page element. The site search box is a page element. The main navigation is a page element, but they work together, all right? But we need to look deeper and beyond just that. There are three fundamental characteristics of a page element that we must consider at all times. Its placement on the page, its visual treatment and how it's presented on the page, and its behavior on those situations where an element can engage with the consumer. They're all very different but equally important, and we're going to talk a lot more about that later on in this presentation. So there's something I call rules of engagement. There are actually best practice rules of engagement that dictate page element placement, visual treatment, and behavior. And there's 5 here. And so I'm just going to talk high level about the 5, because throughout this presentation, I'm going to use examples for this to make a lot more sense to you. So the first one, the evolution and dynamic of the fold. Look, back 10 plus years ago when we didn't have the smartphone, in the good old days, we call it the good old days, it makes me feel old, we didn't have to worry so much about the smaller screens, and the fold was a real thing, and it was really easily defined. Everybody's screen was the same size. It was so easy. But as things change and progress, and you have different screen sizes and different monitor sizes even, people have forgotten or lost a bit of sight of the fold. It's as important as ever. It's just the dynamic has changed, and we're going to talk more about that later on. Number 2, the consumer's eye tracking and scanning behavior absolutely influences page element placement. More examples to come. Number 3, today's consumer is on a journey, and each journey comprises multiple micro steps. This is really important. The days of where consumers would spend 1, 2, 3, or 4 clicks and then buy are long gone. And Google's just done a study recently, in fact, found that not only do they comprise a journey, an average journey is comprised of multiple little tiny steps, they're getting longer because we have more information to engage with to assist us, being the consumer, in our decision making. Number 4, consumers exert both physical and mental effort throughout the journey. This is known as interaction cost. This is the cost of the consumer in how they interact with you. All right, now, and it's your job as the retailer to reduce this effort. Now, you're never going to get rid of interaction costs, but you need to be vigilant and always be thinking, how can I reduce it further? And it's really also important to note the dichotomy of physical and mental effort. Physical is like the clicking, and mental is like the confusion brought on when things become too hard or consumers have lost their way. Well, there's lots of examples in this presentation. It gives you a lot more context to what this means and the impact this brings. Number 5, today's consumer wants to be in control throughout the journey. That's important one, and we're going to come back to that one later as well. All right. Now, it's really important for us to talk about the purpose of the homepage, because this assists in decision making on page elements. And there's 4. The first one, to validate to the consumer he or she has landed on the right website or page on the website. Number 2, to introduce product ranges and support services. Number 3, to communicate feature campaigns, promotions. And number 4, the most important one of the lot, to effectively and efficiently move the consumer through to his or her next micro step. All right, so we're already talking about rules of engagement here with micro steps, and the home page is to elegantly move them on to the next step of their longer journeys. We'll come back to that. All right, here you go. Here's the first look at the desktop version of a best practice homepage. Again, don't worry, you're going to get copies of this. Don't start scribbling, write it down. The other thing I'll also mention too is that we're going to talk about the smartphone version of this, or how we translate this into the smartphone later on, okay? And we're also going to chunk this page down. We're going to talk about sections next too. I know it's a bit of a lot to take in right now. Don't worry, we're going to break it down. All right, let's first talk about the header. So the page elements residing within the header is you've got a logo, you've got what I call a global navigation, which are those series of links that sit across the top of the header. You have the search box, you have the mini cart, you have the main navigation, you have the mega menu, which you can't currently see, don't worry. And then something I call below the main navigation, the customer service bar. So again, I'm just going to call out a few of these elements. There's a lot more detail in the white paper, but for the sake of this conversation, we're just going to stick to some highlights. First one I want to talk about is the logo. User research proves keeping the logo on the left-hand side of the header contributes to brand recall. There's a lot of research where they've done some tests to show what happens when you move the logo over to the right. Brand recall actually reduces. And this again immediately calls back to the scanning behavior rule of engagement that we just quickly talked about. The scanning behaviors start from left to right. You want that to be the first thing they see. That reinforces the fact I'm on the right side, I've got the right brand, let's go. Site search box. The site search box and its purpose is in line with the homepage purpose, to move consumers on to the next step. But thanks to Google, consumers are conditioned to think the search box brings with it relevant content, but there's a caveat to that. If the mechanics of the search box are to a high standard, that's the logic behind the scenes and how it calls the database, et cetera, this element contributes heavily to delivering amazing online experiences. Now, we're not talking about mechanics today, okay? That is, that on its own, that is a 60-minute presentation that I'm not going to get into. However, I just want to call out the fact that in the context of today's conversation, we are talking about the treatment, the visual treatment of this element and its importance in journeys. So some stats that have come out of eConsultancy. Number 1, 25% to 35% of consumers incorporate site search in their journey. That's really important. And I just want to speak about that just for a moment. Don't think for a minute when consumers come to the home page, they're going to immediately launch into the site search. A lot do, don't get me wrong. However, you'd be amazed if you're not looking at your data, the volume of consumers that reach out and use the site search when they have conducted a series of micro steps in your site. They're deep within the site. Why do they call out the site search? Well, there'll be many reasons. They could be at a certain part and they're still not receiving relevant content that's relevant to their intent. They could have navigated their way to a brick wall, literally, and they don't know what the next step needs to be. In this kind of scenario, they'll take a back step. They may go back to the home page, start again. A lot of people leave. But a lot of people also will refer and reach out to the site to say, maybe this can help me. That's really important. Number 2, those who use the page element are more than twice as likely to purchase. Again, caveat, mechanics is working. However, what does this mean from a treatment perspective in the context of this conversation? We need to make this visually accessible, and as a retailer, we want consumers to use it. So we don't want to hide it, and we want to make it visually strong. All right, so there's best practice visual characteristics we need to abide by. Number 1, size matters. There's a correlation to the size of the search box and its use. Number two, keep the search box away from clutter. You can have a big search box, but if you're surrounded with noise, it becomes less visually accessible. Apply styling to visually draw the consumer's eye to it. Good idea. Build a strong call to action to prompt the activation of a search as well. That tells people that this is an element they can engage with. So an example in action. I'm sure most of you listening know who John Lewis is. They're a very successful omni-channel retailer based in the UK. And the screenshot of their header that you see at the top, that's what their header looked like back in 2015 and earlier. But in mid-2015 or late or early 2016, I should say, they redesigned their header, and what you see below is what they have now. Look at the difference of the search box. It's enormous. I should also call out too that the magnifying glass in the new header, even though it's smaller and it doesn't say search, it actually looks more like a clickable element as opposed to the old version of the search, which is very flat. Okay, great example of best practice site search box. Okay, cool. Fixed main navigation. So a recent survey of a little over 2,000 UK respondents had 41% say easy navigation is the most important feature while shopping online. But we need to unpack that term easy a little bit so we understand how we can leverage this insight. Part of making it easy is its visual treatment and making it constantly accessible on desktop. Okay, makes sense. So here's some examples in action. There's REI, is a very large outdoor retailer in the US. Fixed main navigation. An example more locally is Rebel Sports. This is a really good example of a main navigation design because not only does it deliver contrast, but it gives a little bit more size so they can have a little bit more explanation to the categories. And I know some of you are thinking, well, Greg, this is actually common sense. You know, I don't even know why you're wasting our time on this. Well, in actual fact, there's a lot of examples where this treatment of this element is actually not working. And this is one of the reasons why I'm calling out House of Fraser. Now, House of Fraser back in 2015, they set out a press release and said they're using this treatment of their main navigation on the desktop because they get so much traffic from their smartphone coming to their desktop. They see this. Okay, so they think there should be some continuity in the navigation devices across device. But what the House of Fraser is actually missing is they're forgetting the context of consumers and how they engage with sites on desktop screens. There's an expectation of that visually fixed main navigation element. And user research has proven that consumers are utilizing the main navigation, not only at the beginning when they land on the homepage, but when they're deeper in the site to actually leap over into new categories. It's done. So here's an example of the risks of interaction cost, physical and mental effort, actually being increased with this treatment. All right, let's talk about the mega menu. The extension of making navigation easy is the visual treatment and behavior of the mega menu. Now, when I say visual treatment, this is both in how the navigation structure or hierarchy appears, as well as how the entire mega menu is presented on the screen when it's activated. Okay, so for all of you listening in, think about your current mega menu, and I'm going to ask you some questions and answer them back to yourself and see if you've got this right. Number one, can you see where the mega menu starts and stops? Is there enough contrast in the mega menu? Does it blend in with the page content behind it? Does a consumer need to scroll to see the bottom portion of the mega menu? This is back to that fold rule of engagement we talked about already. Then when I'm talking about behavior, this is about how it activates and deactivates. Now, how many of you listening with your mouse, you've activated the mega menu and you've moved your mouse over to a category that you want to click within the mega menu and the mega menu disappears? How frustrating is that? That's a great example of mental effort. Where did it go? So a good example of this in action, best practice, John Lewis. When you mouse over a main navigation item, the entire back of the screen darkens, which enables the consumer's eyes to focus on the content they want to engage with. It's perfect. And not only that, but the way that they've laid out their navigation structure, it's very clear what a main category and a subcategory and a sequence of categories actually looks like. It all makes sense. Great example of a mega menu in action. Okay. The customer service bar. I'll explain to you all why I call it that. So this page element is anchored below the main navigation and should be considered as being part of the header. So what does that mean when I say anchored? That means it's visible content on every single page throughout the site. Its purpose is to present that support content that consumers commonly crave during their buying journeys. Now look, I've done years of consumer path analysis for hundreds of retailers to actually find out what journeys consumers are taking on their paths to purchase. And one thing I commonly see is consumers who really have intent, who really want to buy, the effort they go to find delivery and returns content. You would not believe it, the clicks they endure. And some of them get frustrated and they leave. The exit rates that I'm seeing is high, but there are people who are enduring it for whatever reason. Call it brand loyalty, don't know. So we want to make this content more visually accessible. Now from eConsultancy, there was a survey pulling 6,000 online shoppers and they found 83% of consumers require some degree of customer support or support content when completing an online purchase. That makes this page element quite important. So some people might be thinking, well, why don't we just have it on the home page then? Why do we need to anchor it and then have it on all the pages? Those consumers who start their journey with you by not landing on the home page. So what that means is they come from search or whatever source, marketplace, don't know, and they've landed deeper in your site. They've completely skipped the home page. This content is arguably more important to them because they may have more intent than the people landing on your homepage. This content's available and important to them, okay? And it's important to remember when we're talking about creating amazing online experiences, one of the fundamental rules of creating great experiences is presenting content when consumers need it, okay? So here's a great example. A woman comes to a site and she wants to buy a dress for a date-driven event. And you have delivery content in the customer service bar. Cool. Not important to her yet because she hasn't picked the dress yet. She doesn't even know if you have a dress that actually fits her needs. However, when she finds that dress, you better believe that delivery content becomes a very important part of her buying decision-making. And she knows where it is because it's at the top in the customer service bar. She doesn't need to go hunting for it. All right? So the types of content to feature in the customer service bar: delivery messaging, a post-purchase promise; returns messaging, another post-purchase promise. And the reason why I'm calling out these post-purchase promises, try to say that fast 10 times, is because when consumers are at that point of buying, they have a level of anxiety or risk. Because remember, in physical retail, when they hand over their money, they get it back, not online. So you need to reduce that anxiety. You need to de-risk this process by making promises and stick to those promises. This content in the customer service bar is full of promises, okay? Store locator content is really good for those retailers or bricks and mortar stores, and contact details too. Examples in action. Argos in the UK, great example. You can see that a delivery is a real pain point for them, so they're making that pretty clear here. More locally, Swan Dry, a very successful retailer in New Zealand and parts of Australia. But look, I think this example is a really good example in that you don't need to make the customer service bar pop. It doesn't need to be blinking, dazzling, or anything. This is a great example of content. It's there, it's not visually strong, but because we know through our rules of engagement that we have these scanning patterns set out, we know the consumer's seeing it. They may not engage with it initially, but they know it's there and they'll get it when they need it. All right, let's move on to what's called the feature content zone. Now, this is the first piece of dedicated content for the homepage. Yeah, we finally got there. And its purpose is to highlight feature promotions or events. Now, this page element is typically driven by what's known as carousel functionality. For those of you who don't know that term, that is banners are moving one on top of the other. And if you look at the top 50 online grossing retailers in the US, a little over half use it. Important point here. Carousels are only effective if they follow best practice page element characteristics. Now there's a problem. Due to the years of retailers conducting a low standard of practice in carousel visual treatment and behavior, consumers have developed a protective condition called carousel banner blindness. And this kind of reverts back to one of our rules of engagement where we said consumers are in full control, okay? Any content that's perceived to be irrelevant is going to be ignored. If you have, and you're monitoring click activity that's coming from your carousel, and the carousel click activity that you're seeing in your data is not to what you think it should be, I have a feeling I know why. So why are carousels being ignored and why are consumers blind or have this condition called carousel banner blindness? Number one, the banners look like print advertising. Well, the reason why banners look like print advertising is because some retailers take their print advertisement and they put it in a banner and stick it on the site. So it is a print advertisement. Remember, any content that looks like a print ad will be perceived as a print ad. Consumers don't want to come to your site and be exposed to print advertisements. It's not why they came there. They didn't engage with you to see advertisements. Number two, the speed of the banners scroll too quickly. This is a great example of mental effort. The consumer's trying to consume this content and it's moving too quick. It's hard work. Number three, there are no intuitive methods to pause or stop banner scrolling. I don't know how many times I've seen this, where they don't have a play or a pause element within the carousel to give consumers full control of this content. Number four, the CTAs, or the calls to action, are either hard to find or completely absent to prompt action. This is another example of mental effort. If a consumer sees some content they want to engage with and they don't know how to get there, that's mental effort. When the banner count is beyond 3, consumers do not have the patience to wait. And that's actually a funny one, because what happens is when retailers get 5 banners, they'll actually say, well, speed it up so they can see all 5. But then you can see what that brings to the experience. So what is best practice? What does good look like in this part of the homepage? Number one, drop the carousel. Easy. Use a single banner image, but just change it out all the time. Number two, construct the banner dimensions to ensure that consumers can see other content below it without scrolling. So this is about the fold again. Give consumers visual signals there's more content down the page. If you have banner dimensions that take up the rest of the screen space, you are creating what's called a false bottom. And what that means is consumers have a perception there's no more content below this banner. And they're thinking, oh, well, there's no point in me scrolling. I'll just kind of find my way from the content that's presented to me here. Number three, the design of the banner is in keeping with brand DNA. Really important. Number four, strong and obvious calls to actions. And number five, all of these recommendations 1 through 4 elegantly translates to the smartphone screens. All right, let's see an example in action. Debenhams in the UK, great example. Got a really nice single fixed banner image that does change out regularly. It's branded, and it's the visual look is within brand. You've got great calls to action, and you've got visual signals that there's more content below. The other thing I'd also just like to say is they've got a really good customer service bar as well. And again, not visually eye-popping, but it's there and you can see it. Great example of best practice. All right, let's move on to the category zone. This is situated below that feature banner. This section of the homepage pictorially represents main categories, and ideally all the main categories, all right? Now, why is this content important? Well, this content can be and should be a visual representation of each of your main categories. So with the main navigation within the header, you've got obviously a certain amount of space. So what that does for many retailers is it forces them to have very simple, concise titles for the main categories. And if you've got a lot of main categories, you've got to be really concise. And a great example of that is department stores. Okay, they've got beauty or electrical or home. What does home mean? So with this content, you have the ability to give the consumer more context as to what's beyond home as a category title. Number two, this becomes another navigational device to assist consumers with their next micro step, purpose of the homepage. So user research was completed by Baymard Institute, which is a very large, reputable user research firm in the US, found consumers who are new to a site, rely more on this content. 25% viewed this content to determine the type of site they landed on and gain perspective of the product ranges on offer. All right. This area of the homepage adds significant value to the smaller devices, tablet, smartphone screens, where main navigation and mega menus are either not accessible or they just don't work on those screens. Really important content. Now, I want to go back one step to this slide, and I want to talk about this for just a moment, because when I present this to clients, I get feedback, a lot of feedback. And this is the kind of feedback I get. And they go, look, Greg, you know, I'm not gonna lie to you, this is ugly, okay? And we're a fashion conscious brand. This visual aspect of what we do is strategic to our business. We can't do, this is against our core beliefs. And it's great feedback, and I do get it a lot. But the main answer here is best practice can and does work with that kind of business strategy. This is the thing about best practice. It is meant to support and enable business strategy. But we just have to work around the treatment of the elements to maintain the best practice function, but support and enable the strategy, okay? So some examples in action. This is taken from House of Fraser, and they do present a large portion of their main categories pictorially in the body of their homepage. And they've done a little bit of a change on the time that I've pulled this off the homepage. I thought it was really good because they're actually featuring the new arrivals within each of their main categories. Another example is a very fashion conscious retailer, Sacha Drake in Australia. And again, a great example of a fashion brand who's really passionate about that part of their brand strategy. And they've done a great job of representing their main categories within brand. And the other thing I'd also like to call out here is they've actually pulled out their subcategories under their dress category and pictorially represented each of their subcategories as well. All right. Now, some of you have probably looked at the wireframe of the homepage and said, hang on a second, Greg, where are the products? There are no products on the homepage. What are you doing? You've forgotten. I think this slide kind of tells why there are no products on the wireframe, because products do not belong on the homepage, okay? So retailers put products on the homepage because they think they know what the consumer wants as soon as they arrive. Now, Inc.com has done significant research specifically on this topic, and this is some of the messages that have come out of their results. And I want to read it because it's really important. The use of demographic data, historical data, and social profiles won't be sufficient. The new consumer behavior drivers won't be uniform or consistent. The real winners are retailers who will understand that each time a customer now appears, it's essentially a brand new day, dictated and determined in the moment by the customer's then dominant and most pressing desires. Really important, okay? So what's really cool about this is what Inc.com refers to as being in the moment. Google talks about this all the time, but they call it the micro moments. And I'm not sure if many of you listening have actually heard of that, but this is what Google has to say about micro moments. Mobile, smartphones, has forever changed the way we live, and it's forever changed what we expect of brands. It's fractured the consumer journey into hundreds of real-time intent-driven micro moments. Again, I'm going to take you back 10 years before the smartphone. Back, I was doing customer experience designs back just when it was desktops on a fixed screen. And look, back then it was, the analysis we did was fascinating because consumers would have an intent or a need to engage, and they would somehow park that need until they got to their office computer or their home computer, and then they went for it. Well, now that everybody has a supercomputer in the palm of their hands, when they have that moment, it's instantly acted on. And that's what Google means about this fractured journey. So what does that mean in the context of retailers and specifically the homepage? To create great experiences, retailers need to present navigational content to enable the consumer to move towards relevant content aligned to their intent as quickly as possible, which is why that is the most important purpose of the homepage. Okay, here's an example in action, a bad example, let's call it. Walmart, everybody knows Walmart. Gotta say, love the search box, very Amazon-y. But look, below the feature image, you've got sponsored products you might like. Now, everybody who's listening knows consumers are not stupid. They know what that is. And what that says to consumers is, Walmart, those guys are paying to be on your homepage. So you making money off of them is more important than giving me relevant content. It's not a good look. That's a great example of not best practice, okay? All right, now look, I've intentionally skipped the footer because I know we're precious on time here. Just be aware that there's a commentary on the footer in the white paper and you can learn more about that then. Let's talk about the homepage smartphone, right? So when I speak with a lot of retailers, I'll use the word frustration. About they've worked so hard to develop all this amazing content on the desktop screen, and they're saying, well, how do we cram this into a smaller screen? This is all so hard. But I want us to pause for a moment and have some empathy for the consumer, and let's just think about what the consumer's going through when they're trying to engage on small screens. Number one, the consumer loses the use of the mouse, a precise tool to drive engagement. And it's replaced with a bigger, clunkier, well, I'll say clunky, maybe not fair, but it's a bigger tool and it's far less precise, let's be honest. Number two, the consumer must now incorporate a cluster of finger gestures to engage with content. Well, that's essentially increasing physical effort. Number three, the consumer needs to hunt for content and functionality that was much more visually accessible on larger screens. This act of hunting and trying to find things that are hidden, that's increasing mental effort. So essentially what we're saying here is, before they even start, we know the interaction cost, both physical and mental effort, is going to be increased no matter what we do on the smartphone. So we have to work 10 times as hard to make experiences work for consumers on the smaller screen. Okay? So with that brings a new batch of rules of engagement. Just when you thought you had enough with the first 5, you've got another 5 to worry about. And these, again, affect and influence page element placement, treatment, behavior. Let's talk about them very quickly. Rule number 1, the hover effect is gone. It's no longer there. The device that designers use to provide visual cues when you mouse over elements on the desktop doesn't happen on smartphone. So what does that mean? When you translate the design over, you need to make sure that there are cues that are obvious that don't require hovers. Rule number 2 is an extension of rule number 1. Beware of flat design. Flat design is a great philosophy. However, the purists sometimes create trouble in that the consumer doesn't understand what elements they can and cannot engage with. This increases mental effort. Rule number 3, create large finger targets. We've got a bigger tool. We need bigger targets. So hang on, some of you are thinking, wait a minute, Greg, are you saying that on a smaller screen we've got to create bigger targets? That's exactly what I'm saying. But it's not only just bigger targets, it's also leveraging and utilizing white space around them as well. Give them some room. Rule number 4, emphasize validation on consumer actions. If they click on an element, make sure it's visually obvious that things are happening for them. And number 5, respect the fold. Respect the fold on the smartphone. And I think this is a really important one because I don't want everybody listening to think, oh, hang on a second, Greg. People always scroll on smartphones. Actually, that's not the case. They're conditioned to scroll. However, remember, consumers are in control. And if they get onto a smartphone page and all the content above the fold looks really relevant, the consumer assumes there's more relevancy below the fold, and that's going to prompt scrolling behavior. However, if they see garbage up top, they're going to assume there's garbage down below. Why do you think that Facebook spends so much time working on that algorithm to ensure that every single time you open up the Facebook app, it is the most relevant content sitting above the fold? Now, to retailers, scrolling is the new page view. All right, we want scrolling behavior to happen. There is studies that have proven there is a correlation alongside scrolling behavior and online purchases on smartphones. They go together. You want the scrolling, respect the fold. All right. So here's your first look at the smartphone homepage. Now look, everything that we've just talked about, all of the value and the benefits of the page elements all apply. So what we're just going to talk about is, we're just going to call out some good examples of this in action and talk about some of the page element treatments. First one, the header. Look, a couple things about the header. We need to start prioritizing the page elements that we need to visually produce in this section. At the same time, we do not want this to be a big region, fixed region of the homepage, because we want as much screen space below it to present dynamic content, okay? Really important. So there's this prioritization, and it will vary based on business strategy, but best practice supports that, like I said before. And you can see, for one example, the stores page element is called out in this example for those retailers who have a bricks and mortar footprint, right? The other thing to consider that's, again, best practice is to fix the site search box in the header. We've already talked extensively about its impacts to customer experiences. Arguably, it's more important on smartphone screens, okay? Remember we talked about interaction costs. The tolerance for consumers is lower because their interaction cost is higher. They may revert to the site search box quicker. Some examples. Excuse me. Sephora is a great example of a best practice header. You've got really great white space in between the elements and a permanently fixed search box. Great example. Williams & Sonoma, a very large retailer in the US. Actually shown some really good growth recently, by the way. A great example of a best practice header. Again, nice space between the headers. The stores element is obvious, it's beautiful. The search box, permanently fixed. Home Depot goes next level, and they just do a single row for their header, but they do a great job of it. And look at the space that they have to allow the dynamic content to appear, increasing the content above the fold. A great example of a retailer thinking outside the box. Another great example of a best practice header more locally, taking shape. Beautiful placement of page elements, nice space, permanently fixed search box. All right. Let's talk about the feature content and category zones. We'll talk about them together because we know the purposes. Let's just see some examples in action. First one, John Lewis. Again, single image that's changing all the time, but the really good thing about this example is look below that feature image and you can see browse by department is peaking above the fold. That's done, and that's not an accident, okay? And then when you actually scroll down, you've got this beautiful, clean presentation of all their main categories, all of them. Another example is Williams and Sonoma, where they're also placing all of their main category content. They've got a lot of them down the body of the homepage. Okay, and again, I'm going to leave the footer. It's in the white paper. So there you go, team. That's really what I wanted to cover off with you with this highlight reel of the best practice homepage white paper. I do want to thank you for your time. Look, if even just one or two of you have got some ideas that you can take away and it improves things, it was worth it. If anybody's interested in speaking in more detail about this topic or anything else for that matter, you've got my email address and you've got sales@estaronline.com. We've got some gifted sales directors who knows all this stuff too, and they can talk to you about it. And look, I would like to take it back to Pranitha and see if we can handle or tackle any questions that's come out of this.
Thank you so much, Greg, for such an insightful presentation. Guys, just want to let you know that the white paper is now available to download. So if you look on your dashboard, you should find that available there. Yeah, it was a fantastic session. So I learned a lot about home pages and best practice, especially how some of these top retailers like House of Fraser and Home Depot are utilizing, specific homepage elements. So I hope you guys got a lot out of it. We have a few questions lined up for Greg about his presentation. We've got one from Alexander. He wants to know, what about displaying tailored, based on preferences, analysis, product recommendations on home pages?
Yeah. So yeah, look, that's a really good question. And so gone around the houses on this a lot with large retailers who have a lot of data, and we've actually tested it. And the best answer I can give to that answer is there's a lot of talk about AI and the way that data can actually deliver a lot more preference-driven product content, or just content for that matter. But the ideal time to deliver that preference-driven content is when the consumer has actually engaged with more than just the homepage. When they've engaged with a couple pages deeper in the site, and the AI can start to gather what their intent is. Because remember, when they come to the homepage, they've just typed in a brand name, or they've typed in the domain name of the retailer. So you really don't know, just like what an Inc.com said, it's a brand new day. And you do run the risk of getting it wrong.
Okay, Greg, I've got a quick question from Leish Ritson. She's a bit, she's not familiar with A/B testing, so if you could just describe that for her briefly.
Right. Yeah, of course. My apologies for not talking more about that. A/B testing is the ability to take two variations of, we'll just talk about it for just with the home page, but have one different variation of the home page and test it against another. So it's only a single change that's done on the test. And what happens is the technology actually serves up the two variations of the page, and it actually records if that one page or the other has a better value to a consumer. So there's goals that you would set to each page, and it could be clicking on to another main category or whatever the case may be. It's different for everybody. And then the technology actually records the results, and it has to stay for a while, and it needs to produce an emphatic winner. Okay, and this is the trap that people get into, though, because if they're testing off of home pages that are not best practice, the results aren't going to add value. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that does make sense. Got another question for you, Greg. What impacts have the best practice changes made to retailers who adopt these recommendations?
Yeah. So what I do when I get into these changes and digital transformations, we're always benchmarking existing performance for this exact reason, because when you undergo digital transformation, it's a bit of a journey for the retailer as well. So we're benchmarking, and what we look at closely is in Google Analytics. For those of you who know Google Analytics, there's a specific reporting under all pages, under behavior, sorry, a little bit specific here, that allows you to see the page value of the home page. And what that does is Google's actually looking at the ability for the home page content to contribute to a sale. So when we make the changes, we actually monitor the page values to see if it goes up. We make these changes to say, oh, this actually delivered a better starting point for consumers who land on the homepage. And that's how we do it. And in my experience with retailers, I can't give away any numbers, of course, but I consistently see 30 to 50% increases in page value. Now that has a significant translation to revenue when you think about how some homepages get hit very hard with traffic.
Okay, and we've got time for one more question, Greg. If products are not meant to be positioned on the homepage, what do you recommend retailers do if they have a small core range of products that are consistently high sellers?
Yeah, that's a really common question I get when it comes to that. Products shouldn't be on the homepage comment. It's always a good debate. But look, I think the main point here is if you've got a core set of product ranges or a mix of products that are kind of like your bread and butter, cramming it on the homepage isn't going to do any good. What you need to do is, through more visual content, draw people into a section of your site that is dedicated to this core range. This is the biggest problem, and this is why consumers are cramming product on their homepage, because they think this is the best place for it, this is our top seller, but they do very little justice because they don't explain why the product's on the homepage for the first place. So consumers just think, well, why is this on here? I don't even understand. But if you had a tile that said, see our best sellers, or see this winter's best sellers, or something that indicates if they click on this content, they're going to see something that's really valuable, and then you dress up that category accordingly, that's a better experience, and you get a lot more traction out of your core range.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Greg, for such a insightful presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. The video for this webinar will be available soon online. Please sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already for any upcoming webinars that could be of help to you at www.powerretail.com.au. The Power Retail and eStar team are signing out for now. I hope you all have a lovely day. Bye.
Thank you.